Our faith is one that reminds us that your life really is just, you're just going to transition very soon to meet your Creator. Be prepared for that.
This is serious stuff. Like, you do not want a situation where the wealth is being distributed incorrectly because of your negligence.
Similar to mahar, by the way. Prior to marriage, a woman says, I don't want any mahar.
It don't matter.
And then she gets married, nikah is done, she says, where's my mahar? She gets it. Now again, she should...
In most instances, like, females are always getting less. What's the reasoning behind that? Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Said you had to wait for your salat. So we still have Ustad with us for today's podcast. Before we start, those new to SalaamSeeker, we've kept him for the week. Those new to our podcast, inshallah, please like, subscribe and share, especially subscribe to our channel, so we can continue producing more of this contents related to Islamic content and stuff around how I'm going on and on. Subhanallah. So I'm losing. I've lost them. They're gone. It's all right. Today, what we're going to talk about is inheritance, and it's a very broad topic. We're not going to go too detailed into the actual like fiqh of inheritance. If we have questions, then we will. But the importance of inheritance, and Ustad, we were talking about this as well. For you, when we were talking about inheritance, you said one of the most important things that you want to encourage Muslims is to write a will. So I want to go straight into that. Why did you say that, Ustad?
The Prophet ﷺ said, it's not permissible for a Muslim to pass 2 nights without having prepared his own will. What we need to appreciate is, alhamdulillah, we are all gifted with wealth in this life that's not going to go with us. When we leave, that becomes an asset that's passed on to our children, to our family members, and oftentimes that can be a point of great dispute. One of the biggest disputes you find typically in our families tends to be land, whether it be here or abroad, or wealth and its distribution amongst family members. And so the Prophet ﷺ encouraged that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala details it in the Quran. It's one of those few topics that's completely detailed in the Quran, because He knows that we are players. We'll always find a way of trying to justify and take advantage of others, especially those that are perhaps not as outspoken. And so it's really important that from an Islamic perspective, we recognize that. The social problems that come about from it are evident, whether it's from a Muslim background or from a non-Muslim background. The importance of a will in this country, if you do not have a will stating that you would like your assets to be distributed in an Islamic way, they will be taken by the state. And the state will apply, after its 40% inheritance tax, will use the law of this land in order to distribute them, which may not be in accordance with the Islamic guidelines.
Oh, so actually that's a point, because I do always wonder, and Siddhi, you may have some insight on this. If we as Muslims have a Islamic will, does that override, and Ustad, maybe you can have an input in that, the will that the West say that we should have if
Yeah, we have one on the Islam Answers website. It's downloadable. So I produced this working together with a barrister.
Okay.
And basically what I said is I want a document that, and I kept it very general, as Ustaz just mentioned, because that's far better and easier if you keep it quite general, rather than this person gets this person gets this person gets this. Yeah. I want my assets to be distributed according to Islamic law. Yeah. I made it a little bit more specific, you mentioned your madhab, etc. Because although the vast majority of what takes place in terms of inheritance is mentioned in the Holy Quran, there is still some room for ikhtilaf. You have a famous example, this is in Tirmidhi, where a grandmother came to Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala and said, what does the grandmother inherit? And Sayyidina Abu Bakr said, well, I don't find anything in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I will gather the people and ask them if they know anything from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A Sahabi, so Sayyidina Abu Bakr gathered them and asked them, a Sahabi, if I'm not mistaken, it was Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah. He said that I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say the grandmother gets a sixth. and Sayyidina Abu Bakr, out of his great caution for hadith, he said, do you have another? Meaning somebody else who can corroborate for you. I believe it was, he said yes, and he brought Muhammad ibn Maslama. And he corroborated, and then he gave the fatwa, essentially, that gets us 6. So the point is, there are few things not mentioned in the Holy Quran, but the vast majority is there in the Holy Quran itself. So the point is, since there's a little bit of room for difference of opinion and such things, I did specify it. But the whole purpose of that document was people can fill it in, and then and it essentially says, I want my assets distributed according to Islam, and it's legally valid and binding in the UK. That was the whole purpose of it.
That's the point. Otherwise, there'd be no point.
And subsequently, I've had it checked by maybe 4 or 5 different legal professionals. But despite that, anybody who gets in touch with me, I say, look, download it. And you can ask your own legal professional friends and family, etc. Because I can take responsibility for the Islamic side of it. I'm not a lawyer in British law. I'm not an expert in British law. So that you can check with your own authorities. But that was the entire purpose of it.
So
free download.
Free download.
Is that? Yeah, but do you only write a will when you know you have assets, or is it for anyone?
Good question.
I mean, ultimately, from a Shari'i perspective, almost everybody will have assets, because when you pass away, even your clothes are inherited. Everything that has monetary value is inherited.
Okay.
Anything
That's
of monetary
different
value.
to the assets when we say like
For zakat.
Zakat.
It's different for zakat.
So any form of property, not like
Anything,
it's
anything of monetary
everything.
value.
So Siddi, actually, I'm a first-hand user of such downloadable will. It's very Ustad. I'll share it with you, but it's extremely simple, but has the aspects of, doesn't go into the detail, but the really good thing is it actually says as per Islamic, and the good thing about it is you can give a third of it to someone wasiyas there, which is really good. So you can give it for kafara if you fear that you might have khada, salah or fast or whatever it is, or you can give it to someone who you genuinely, it can't be part of the will. But I done this, and it's actually very easy to do, and I think I would highly recommend people to do it, and it is something that if it's legally tested as well, it was something that's very easy for someone just to do it.
Absolutely. So on that point, so there is a distinction. So anybody that's got some assets should have a will prepared. The free wills, the basic wills, will only suffice up to the threshold, which in the UK is £325,000. After that point, inheritance tax is applied and will have a significant impact upon what is going to be distributed and how it's going to be distributed. So once you reach that value, and for many who have a property as an example, you've already got an asset that may exceed that.
Over it,
If you've got property abroad, you can imagine gold, jewelry, things like that quite quickly take people over that threshold. And that can be shared amongst families, spouse members, things like that. However, it's always best to seek legal advice when you reach that threshold, specifically because you want to make sure that your will is still legally binding and gives the maximum amount to your beneficiaries.
Oh, that's a really good point, actually, because
I think I've got, because I have the will and then the notes.
Okay.
And we speak about in the notes that if you're above the threshold, then seek advice from an accountant and a lawyer.
Okay, so what would happen in that instance?
I'm neither of those two things. So I can speak about it Islamically. I can't speak about it from that perspective. But the point is, you end up in some difficulties because the accountant will want you to organize your finances in a particular manner, which according to the standard Islamic rulings is not the way we're going to do things. But then you're doing it in order to avoid a massive amount of tax. It gets quite complicated if you're in that situation. It gets quite complicated. So my advice would be, if a person is above the threshold, speak to a scholar, but also speak to an accountant, speak to a lawyer, because yes, Islamically, we don't want you to be paying lots and lots of tax if it's legally avoidable. But at the same time, you don't want to be in a situation where your assets are distributed contrary to the Islamic teaching.
So sorry, I'm a little bit confused now, and that might just be my general state. But so say if I'm over the threshold, or anyone is over the threshold, if something happens to that person, what does that mean then? What does that mean in terms of like their assets? Because I have said that I want this to be as per Islamically distributed, But say if someone's got like 500, 600,000.
You've got millions
how
of
does that
pounds,
work?
you're going to be subject to inheritance tax.
So what does
And
that?
there are ways and means that accountants can present to you where you could minimize your inheritance tax.
Say that
We
tax is.
haven't. Future
Yeah, the operative word is future. So in present, you may not have. Oh, do you know? If you know.
This is what Siddhi said. So yeah, there'll be ways to minimize the tax
Okay, fine.
based on what type of asset. So if it's like your residence,
Yeah.
you get an additional allowance of 175,000.
So like you add these bits and bobs, and yeah.
And then if you obviously married, if you have a spouse, then you get some sort of allowance as well. So
Okay.
again, the accountant will calculate everything.
So say if someone doesn't go down that route and doesn't seek an accountant's advice or whatever, and they've got a will, using Siddhi's template, and then basically they die, but their asset is beyond 600,000. Ustad, what would happen?
So they could still apply the Sharia rulings.
But that's up to 300.
No, regardless. The Sharia rulings apply. So basically, just a couple of clauses, as Shaykh has already mentioned, that you'd want to state in the will. You want to state that you're a Muslim. You want to be buried as a Muslim. Where possible, you could prefer an MRI rather than having an autopsy. So there are things that you'd want to state within that, simply because our faith has specific recommendations.
But
regardless of
wouldn't the
madhab.
Muslim community do that anyway?
No,
Ustad?
but the Muslim community have not had a statement that they should execute in a particular way until you stipulated it. So in that case, remember, in many cases, we may not necessarily be in control of the circumstances in terms of where we pass away, what particularly
that's
takes
a good
place.
point. Yeah.
So you want to make sure that there's an executor.
To some degree, that will be legally binding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the thing is, what sometimes happens, you'll have a new Muslim passes away, and the community tries to get the body
Yeah, I've
released
heard
to
that
them.
situation. Yeah.
But the family, this is
Want
not
it
always the
cremated or
case.
something.
Yeah, they want to do it their way, and then we
Yeah.
have a problem.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's in the will, and then that will, especially for new Muslims, it's good to give it to, not just keep it to themselves, but to give it to trusted members of the community. Then they are legally empowered to do something
Does
about
that
it.
will have that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Fine. Okay. So then, what happens, Ustad? in that?
So those stipulations are just an overall protection that reflect
Yeah.
our faith. And then you'd state the simple clause ultimately is that we want it to be distributed according to Quran
Yeah.
and the
Exactly.
prophetic
That's
guidance.
the most important part of it. Yeah.
With the when the £325,000 individual threshold is met, then there's a 40% inheritance tax that will
Okay.
be applied straight off. And again, nobody's averse to paying tax in this particular circumstance. That's a right that you have to pay. However, if you were to speak to a specialist in Islamic wills, what they would do is they are able to set up trusts that get propped up at the point of death. So this is actually when somebody is deceased, a trust can be propped up with stated trustees who can be family members or non-family members, and the assets are then moved into the ownership of the trust. And then within that, you can actually reduce the amount of tax and therefore ensure that those family members benefit in a slightly better way by setting up a
mashallah,
trust.
okay.
So there are arrangements like that.
But
an experience.
the point is that beyond the tax, there's no concern of the distribution through Islamic means,
No.
Islamic law.
That distribution, remember, is not regulated in this country. So what that means is you will state it, but you need to have an executor that can enact that. And this is a really important point in this discussion, because oftentimes the executor may be a friend of the family. They can't necessarily be a beneficiary.
Yeah.
They definitely can't be a beneficiary. So they may be a friend of the family. The problem is, and I'm sure Sheikh, you've experienced this many times, somebody's passed away and the siblings, or perhaps other family members that are due part of it, who have a stronger voice, just won't accept it.
Yeah,
And it becomes very difficult. So if an executor is from outside the family, they can't impose, much as they would say, look, the document states this. So the character of the family really is important, that they maintain Islamic etiquette in that. That conversation, we need to be more mature in our lifetimes about having this conversation with our family.
That's a very important point,
I think this is one of our shortcomings.
Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ said, "Akthiru hadimat lazzat," that you should be a nation that is constant in remembering death.
Yeah.
And we know that in fact, that although it may seem somewhat morbid, Our faith is one that reminds us that your life really is just you're just going to transition very soon to meet your Creator.
Yeah.
Be prepared for that. And oftentimes, because this is so close to us, it's very emotional, it's a difficult topic. But until we can have that in a mature way, we're not going to overcome these challenges. We're not going to prepare our family members, and we're not going to state our wishes.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very important that we do that.
I was just something funny. You know, I basically gave my will and the template to all my siblings. Alhamdulillah, I got quite a few siblings, and the executor is yourself. So you literally execute for like 16 family members. So good luck with that. Mashallah. I did run it past you.
Yeah.
I had to say, but
I'm executed for a lot of wills.
are you? Mashallah. So we should call you the Siddi, the executor. But anyway, you know, on a more serious note, Ustad, you touched upon a very, very good point there, which is actually speaking to our family members. And I found it very difficult to do that. But then when I actually started speaking, they start speaking back to you. And, you know, I've had discussions with my mom, my siblings, you know, this is serious stuff. Like, you do not want a situation where the wealth is being distributed incorrectly because of your negligence, essentially. If you've done as much as you can whilst you're here, beyond that point, and Siddi, I'm sure you can give an Islamic viewpoint, but say beyond that point, you've done everything, and now it's the family members are arguing and stuff like that. That's the sin is not on the person that died, right? Because they've done everything.
No, but ultimately you've empowered them. You've given them all the documents. So if anybody's being wronged, he's been empowered to get justice.
Okay.
That's the whole point of having the will in the
But
first
say
place.
if they kick up a fuss and do all these incorrectly and distribute incorrectly and there's so much injustice, the person that has passed away and correctly given them a documentation saying, I want it to follow by Islam, they're not going to be punished for
No,
it.
because he's empowered.
Okay, fine.
Like, I pass away, I've written a will.
Yeah.
Okay. Whoever's being wronged, whoever's not getting their share can go to court and say, here, give me my share.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of it. Because otherwise the will would kind of be useless.
Yeah.
No.
Is it haram for
Absolutely haram.
not to have a will?
No, to not have a will. I thought you were going to say to take a share. That's
And
not
that's
yours.
what I said, you should wait. Let me finish my question.
No.
Oh, sorry. Okay, fine, go.
So you know you said about being haram.
Yeah. To not have a will, to not have a will,
So I want to add, what if a Muslim member wrote that the sons get all of the
Haram.
Oh yeah,
Completely.
that is
how do you fight
yeah.
that after? So
Oof, that's a
obviously
common
the person that passed away said that the son will get 100%. So
Haram, completely haram. It's contrary to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
You know, we've actually dived into quite a lot of technicalities.
Yeah.
I wanted to start off from a much more generic perspective, which is Muslims, the way we look at inheritance has to completely change.
Okay.
A lot of Muslims, inevitably people are affected by their culture. So the way they look at it, okay, you know, my father, I decide what happens to the wealth. See? You know, why should it be distributed this way? Why should it be distributed this way? Mine, I'll do just like the people of other religion do. We have a fundamental difference in our understanding when it comes to wealth. We don't look at it as, I've earned this, it's mine, I'll do what I like with it. It doesn't work like that as a Muslim. As a Muslim, we say, anything I have, any wealth that I have, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed me with this wealth. It's a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not because I worked hard. It's not because I'm more intelligent, because there are people who work far harder than you
100%.
and they have far less money than you.
Yeah.
And there are people who are far more intelligent than you and they have far less money than you. It's a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The beginning for the believer should be, this is not my wealth. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's. He gave it to me during my life, and he, relatively speaking, gave me a lot of freedom. You have a lot of freedom with regards to what you do with your wealth when you are alive and well. When you pass away, essentially that's taken away from you. You have very little freedom in terms of what happens to your wealth after you pass away. You have the wasiyah, which is up to 1/3 of your wealth. You have quite a lot of flexibility there. Beyond that, it's out of your hands. So no person can make the decision. Islamically speaking, my sons get all of it, my daughters don't get it. My wife gets all of it, my brothers don't get it. That's not your decision to make. The believer at this point, it's simply a matter of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed whatever he decreed, that's it. This is not my decision. You see, that needs to be the starting point. Muslims need to understand that. The person with the wealth before passing away, he needs to thoroughly understand that. And then the inheritors need to thoroughly understand that look, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed, I don't have an automatic right to this wealth. This is given to me from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if the son gets twice as much as the daughter, قدر الله ما شاء فعل. Obviously, there are other aspects of that we can look at, inshallah, that, okay, she gets half as much, but she don't have to spend on anything. Those are other considerations, important considerations, we'll come to them. But this is the starting point. The starting point is, it's not my money. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's. So he does what he wills with it. And whatever he's decreed, that's it. I get no say.
So, Siddhi, going back to that point, if you don't have a will, is that haram?
Here it may well be haram. In a Muslim country, it's not haram. I mean, in a Muslim country where they actually have actionable Islamic
they will
inheritance
do it anyway.
laws.
Yeah.
Actionable, meaning that you could, if somebody doesn't get their right, they could go to court very easily, very quickly, get their haqq.
Yeah.
Now, otherwise, in any given circumstance, you need to do whatever you can to make sure people get their rights.
Yeah.
And in this country, yes, you're going to have to write a will to enable that.
Ustad, based on what Siddhi said, I actually got a question. What is females might look at, if they dive deep into the fiqh of inheritance, and in most instances, like, females are always getting less. What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, I think Shaykh would probably be better placed in that. However, I would like to state that there are many circumstances in which women get more. I think we oftentimes think between the son and the daughters, the proportion is halved as a result.
Yeah.
The first principle I'd like to lay, and Shaykh can go into the details around around actually the split, is that ultimately, who knows best?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
In this country, the state has set some rules and principles. People may have opinions in tribes and places that they've been. Some may say because the eldest child has looked after the parents, they're more due. Anyone can have an opinion. However, justice will only be done by an independent party. The most independent, the one that's understood creation from the beginning of time till the end of time, is the one who's created every one of us. The one who's independent without need. And so that principle is the one that we should first of all really appreciate. Islam is a deen of submission. With love, we recognize our peace will only be found in submitting to the one who's created us. And when we accept that, wherever the ruling may be, God knows best.
That's the point. Because there are a lot of things, even in Muslims, in their minds, this son took care, this son hasn't spoken for 20 years.
And they're getting...
I'm sorry, you don't get to make that decision. Yeah, but it makes rational sense to me. This is the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not the deen of what's in your head. You see? So these things need to be understood by people ahead of time. Unless they understand it ahead of time, what happens? Something occurs, they start distributing the wealth, they realize it's wrong, then the ego kicks in, the money's in their hand, they dig their heels in, and it's one thing to take somebody's wealth without a haqq, without a right to do so. That's terrible. But they'll do worse things. They'll start to argue against what Allah Most High has revealed. Well, that's not fair. That's not just. I took care of mum and dad. He hasn't spoken to them for 20 years. Why is he getting the same as I'm getting? I'm sorry. You've destroyed your dunya and your akhirah. Because now you're questioning what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed. So people need to know ahead of time. They need to understand things well. They prepare themselves ahead of time rather than after the event. When you find out things after the event, sadly, it can cause big problems. Religiously, it can cause big problems. But yes, in terms of the female getting more than the male, this is usually the case if they are equally related.
Okay.
It's not an absolute thing.
Did you say females getting more?
Oh, sorry, I apologize. The male getting more than a female. Thank you.
Yeah,
the male
not
getting more.
or anything.
The male getting twice as much as the female. That's if the relationship to the deceased is equal. Son, daughter, son gets twice as much. Grandson, granddaughter, grandson gets twice as much. Brother, sister, brother gets twice as much unless they are maternal half brothers. Strangely, the maternal half brother and half sister share equally.
Maternal
half brother and half sister. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
They get the same.
Okay.
Now, why? Because here, when the Quran spoke about these,
Yeah.
the Quran didn't say that the male gets twice as much as a female. So in the
that's
Hanafi
so-
madhab, they said no, they get equal
Mashallah.
amounts.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Agrees.
Yeah.
And this family.
They, you see, they get equal. But usually, yes. Usually it is the case
Yeah.
that the male gets twice as much. If the relationship is equal.
Yeah.
Not in all circumstances. If you have a daughter that's inheriting, or let's say two daughters that are inheriting, okay, and then you have a number of grandsons, say 10 grandsons,
The daughters
inevitably the
will.
daughters are going to get more.
Yeah.
So it's not in every circumstance. And obviously we can speak about other aspects of this as well. Okay, even if you have a son and a daughter and the daughter gets half as much as the son gets, but the son has to spend on everything and the daughter doesn't.
Yeah, by Islamic responsibility.
According to
obviously
Islamic
what
law.
people do.
So this son, if he's a husband and a father, he has to
Yeah.
provide for his wife, he has to
Yeah.
provide for his children, he has to pay for everything essentially. This daughter of the deceased, she's a wife to somebody, she don't have to pay anything. She gets to keep her money. Now,
True.
so ultimately, it's as Ustaz said, it's a matter of submitting to Allah
Yeah.
subhanahu wa ta'ala. Look, it's whatever He decreed, that's it.
Yeah. And I think we can go talk about this in so much detail, but I'm just gonna summarize
Can I
some.
ask you a question?
Yeah, sorry.
So can someone give up their part? Like without
That's a good question. Yeah.
Yes, although it's only binding if they give up after the event. Because you have a legal principle
Okay, fine.
that you cannot drop a right prior to its existence.
Yeah.
Yeah, this gets a little bit technical, but right now, if somebody were to say, father's alive and well, somebody were to say to his brothers, if something were to happen, I'm not going to take my share. You can all keep it. Okay,
That's not gonna.
that's not binding right now.
No.
Okay, obviously he should stick to his word. Muslims should stick to their word, but that's not binding right now
He
because
has every right
he
to
has
then get it.
he has foregone or relinquished a right that doesn't currently exist.
Yeah.
What if they were to write it down to people?
Even so,
Still
it
wouldn't.
still
no.
doesn't
It doesn't
exist right
exist because
now.
the father's still alive.
So what will happen is at the point of death, if he relinquishes it, then it will disappear. Similar to mahar, by the way. Prior to marriage, a woman says, "I don't want any mahar."
It don't matter.
Okay, yeah. And then she gets married, nikah is done, she says, "Where's my mahar?" She gets it. Now again, she should, legally, that's legally speaking, she should stick to her word though.
Yeah.
Muslims should stick to their word. But legally
legally it's
speaking,
fine.
she nullified something that didn't currently exist. Whereas after nikah, she says, "I don't want a mahar." The husband says, "Thank you very much, I won't give you a mahar." But that's it, it's gone.
So if after the event of the death, the person relinquishes it, what should be the reaction be of those that are seen? Because it might those let's say four brothers,
Yeah.
three. What should the reaction be of the three brothers? I know what you're gonna say. You get more, but it seems like
I wasn't going to say that.
Oh, sorry. So I guess I don't know what Siddi's gonna say. Then. Yeah. So what should the reaction
It depends on the circumstance. You see,
Yeah.
if the person is wealthy and very happily gives up their right, then the reaction should be, "Thank you very much, Allah Most High bless
say
you."
if there's-
Whereas if the person is, really financially struggling and kind of for some reason feels obliged to give it up because
Yeah.
there's arguments and such things, then they should, try to dissuade this person from giving it
Can
up.
they take? I guess what they can do is take it and then gift back exactly what you would have got, and equally all of them gift.
But here, a gift, he has to accept it.
Exactly. So that could work.
A gift is not valid until the
So
person
how
accepts
should
it.
we touched upon inheritance for new Muslims and what's the implication for them?
Yeah.
Because
Do the
obviously in terms of-
non-Muslim family? Is that what you were going to say? Like,
Would the non-Muslim family get anything from the reverts? And
They would
what
not.
about the other way? And how would it work?
The other way-
the other way you said they do. I remember.
No. This we cannot cover in 1 minute because it's
Okay,
going
so
to be
maybe
very,
we'll do-
very
we'll do-
misleading.
we'll do
If you want to
another-
find out the other way,
we'll do another-
we'll
Look,
just-
let's mention it just very basically, in a very simple sense. The Prophet ﷺ spoke about people of two different religions; they don't inherit from one another. Now we have numerous sound hadith with various wording. So that's the general rule. So if you've got a Muslim person, according to the Islamic teaching, he passes away, his non-Muslim relatives are not going to inherit from him. Now, vice versa, normally no, it's the same because people of two different religions
Yeah.
don't inherit from one another. We have a particular ruling in the Hanafi madhab that speaks about when you're in non-Muslim lands and non-Muslims give you their wealth willingly in a manner that wouldn't otherwise be permitted. It may be permitted to accept it, but that requires a good 10-minute discussion with the proof, with the evidence, with
Okay,
the
fine.
detail. For now, all I will say is if there is a new Muslim whose close relative passes away, and they are upset that they cannot inherit from this person, study Hanafi fiqh, and
You might be able to inherit from
yeah,
that person.
and understand the masala well, understand the difference of opinion that exists regarding this issue, and there may be a position that would permit it.
Ustad, I want. Oh, you had a question.
Yes,
So,
when you asked, I'm going to
Ustad, so
word
what?
it in
But it's more like a summarize. So, Ustad, what would, because I know this was a topic that was discussed. What would you say to Muslims in regard to inheritance as a summary kind
I
of?
think as a summary, I think one of the most important things to recognize is that wealth is a currency, is something that is a test for us, and what we consume is really, really important. So I've seen many circumstances, I'm sure Sheikh has as well, whereby people have disputed, taken others' rights of inheritance upon themselves. I remember one particular instance of a family in London who had spent a long time looking after the aged father. Brothers were all abroad, hadn't even visited. Then when the father passed away, those brothers that hadn't been in contact at all, they were the first to arrive
Subhanallah.
after the janazah has taken place. And the only reason they arrived was to come and collect their apportionment of the wealth. And when they arrived, they argued with the son that had been present here, despite the fact the will clearly stated and there were witnesses present. They argued to the extent where he said, you know what, I don't want this to become a point of difference and difficulty. I would prefer to keep the family together. So he forewent some of his apportionment. And that son continues, I'm talking about the son, so the grandson of the person who's passed away, says, I watched in later years how those people who'd taken my father's wealth, they were abandoned by their own families. Left despite having large properties, they were relegated to almost the basement, while their family members, the children, would leave them behind and pay no attention. What we need to recognize is that if you steal somebody else's, if you take somebody else's right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes any barakah from it. And this, it's a short gain. You're only shortchanging yourself here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has instituted these principles to ensure there's purity in our world, to ensure that they're fairly distributed. And the moment we try adjusting that, we're only going to see ill consequences.
Subhanallah. So, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think I was just going to ask about Sidi, like adopting or fostering, and maybe some of our viewers do that. And are there any inheritance? Maybe we'll see.
An adopted child, excuse me, alhamdulillah, an adopted child doesn't receive irth, what we call irth, which is automatic inheritance, but you can give the adopted child wasiyah.
Yeah, the third.
And ultimately, if somebody wants to, you, in most circumstances, if you gave the entire third to an adopted child, you might end up getting more than your own children.
Yeah.
So although yes, because a lot of people get frightened. Oh, my adopted child's not going to get anything, but I see him as my child, and such things. No problem. Just don't get it. Then, as we said, you submit to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is for your biological children. But I really want the person. No problem. Give them wasiyah.
Yeah, still a big amount.
It could, let's say, for example, you have a person who has one adopted child, 2 sons and 2 daughters. They give the full third to the adopted child. That's going to end up with more than anybody else.
Yeah.
So yes, there are options there, inshallah ta'ala, but ultimately it is a matter of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially when it comes to inheritance. People really do the wrong thing. In that scenario Stars just mentioned, if hopefully the entire family had been thoroughly educated beforehand, they would know that the son blocks the brothers. The brothers don't get anything if there's a son present, according to Sharia, unless they get wasiyah. So if everybody had been educated, and even if those brothers had been educated, there's slight chance they might not have gone ahead and done what they've done. I say slight chance because people, when it comes to money,
Doesn't care,
they just
yeah.
override anything.
Yeah.
But if the family was educated, they might have rallied around the son and said, "Look, we know the law of Allah.
Yeah, we're gonna
subhanahu wa
fight
ta'ala. You
for
don't
it."
get. We're supporting. You don't have to.
Yeah.
But I will commend the son in that case. Allah Most High bless him. He gave
Yeah.
up wealth in order to keep the family together to the best of his ability. Allah Most High reward him.